introduction here, very short and sweet, and then go back on mute. This alarm is quite annoying. So welcome, fellow Rotarians and all of our guests for the day. My name's Glenn Stafford. I'm your MC for today's Rotary Sydney meeting. Now, because we're broadcasting from different locations using Zoom, if you have any difficulties during this meeting, you will be able to see a recording loaded up onto our club website and YouTube in the coming days. Now, may I ask all of you to remember that we have a number of worthy projects that we are running, not least our centenary year and the centenary project, Give Every Child a Future, urgently needs your support and your donations. The project aims to vaccinate 100,000 children in 9 Pacific Island countries against 3 diseases, and we're running this project in partnership with UNICEF. You will see the donate buttons on our website, just follow the links. And also just to remind everybody that when you do register through our booking system for these meetings, you can actually make a donation there to the Rotary Foundation. Now, please be aware that we'll be putting microphones on mute, and that should be happening now, as a matter of fact. And you shouldn't be able to unmute yourself, so we'll unmute speakers as and when they're scheduled to come on. But at the end of the formal meeting, I will unmute everybody, so you should be able to have a conversation. Today's guest speakers are Robert Tickner. Robert was a former minister in both the Hawke and Keating governments, but today he's going to talk about a very personal journey. And also today we'll hear from Jeff Davey, who will speak on Rotary Next Steps, mental health peer support. Now, any questions and comments you have may be submitted via the chat function throughout the talks. Please note that all chat comments are viewable by the meeting hosts. So at this point, I'll shut off this alarm and hand you over to our club president, Fatima Ali. Thank you all.
Thank you, Glenn, and welcome to you all. First, let me begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of this land on which we normally meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. I also extend that respect to leaders of all the lands of the participants in this meeting and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the audience today. Fellow Rotarians and distinguished guests and friends, I welcome you to this afternoon Rotary Club of Sydney meeting. As always, it is a pleasure to have you joining us. Our special welcome to our key speaker today, Robert Tickner. Robert later will do a formal introduction, but for now, welcome, a warm welcome to you all. I would like now to invite Rotarian Paul Mackenzie to give the thought of the day. Thank you, Paul. Can you unmute, Paul?
Can everyone hear me now? Okay, thank you, Madam President. Madam, my fellow Rotarians and guest speaker Robert, I thought I'd use the word today, respect, as a thought for today. So if I can get an image up, I'll wait for long. So if I can get the image that I found on Google later today. Yeah, see if it comes up.
Are you trying to share?
Yeah, the picture that I found about respect. So respect's basically care of attention for fellow humankind, just something for thought. Yeah, through what we do at Rotary, through our work life and in personal life, you know, life's always full of ups and downs and all sorts of life journey like a roller coaster, but something with respect when we're in conflict, just don't forget that respect can be an investment with care and attention that we can resolve problems and can resolve it easily when we have respect for the other side. Nothing worse when people log their heads and they've got no respect for each other and things don't get resolved, especially when something's in conflict or there's an issue and problem, much easier. Especially for investment with care and attention that we do have respect for each other and do resolve problems. But even when there's growth and prosperity and good things, planning, when there's respect there, especially with unity. So a lot can be achieved and be done, that we all do have care and attention for each other. And when we don't have that respect, when there's no respect, it's hard to grow and achieve. So thoughts for today is the word respect and the care of attention for each other to achieve, and especially when there's conflict or issues, to resolve problems.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul. Respect is indeed very important to any human interactions. So thank you for that. Now it gives me a great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Robert Tickner. Robert Tickner AO has a long distinguished career in politics and the humanitarian field. Robert grew up on the New South Wales mid-north coast and became an Aboriginal legal service lawyer. In 1984, he won the federal seat of Hughes and was the Federal Minister for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Affairs from 1990 to 1996, during which he initiated the reconciliation process with Indigenous Australians and was instrumental in instigating the national inquiry into the stolen generations. Robert has became CEO of the Australian Red Cross from 2005 to 2015. He is actively involved in a number of organizations, including age discrimination organization Every Age Counts, the International Red Cross and the Red Crescent Movement, humanitarian aid organization, the CHS or Alliance, and the Justice Reform Initiative. Robert is not here to talk about his professional life, mind you. If he would be talking and saying many, many stories. However, he is with us today to speak about his remarkably moving memoir about reconnecting with his birth family. In his latest book, 10 Doors Down, Robert tells the story of how he met his birth mother, Maida, and father, Len, after more than 40 years. It is an epic, emotionally challenging, but ultimately heartwarming story about the power of familiar bond, love, and life's strange coincidence. Thank you, Robert. To you now.
Thank you, Fatima, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be able to talk to you. I think, Fatima, I'm to talk for about 20 minutes and then have a little time for questions. I'm not always sure how to approach telling the story because it's got such remarkable coincidences that unfold as the story progresses. And it's sometimes tempting to leap straight into telling you what those coincidences were. But maybe if I just tell you a little bit about the progress of meeting my birth family and a little bit about growing up, you'll understand the context in which the reunion took place. And of course, it all happened in the years 1992, 1993, 1994. And that's the period when I was Minister for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Affairs. And I have at the front of the book a little prologue where I talk about this epic meeting with my birth mother on the steps of the Opera House and how deeply moving that was. But I started my growing up part of my life as the adopted son of Gwen and Bert Tickner, who had moved from Sydney as business people, kind of a bit of doing a tree change thing back in the late 1940s. I came into the world on the 24th of December 1951 on Christmas Eve. I was adopted out. My mother and father, who I still regard as my mother and father, Ben and Bert Tickner, came and collected me from Crown Street Hospital, and they took me back to my mother Gwen's childhood home at 18 Lansdowne Street, Marylands, where I stayed about a week or so, and I went then with my mum and dad to foster to have the most privileged and magnificent childhood. Not privileged in the sense of being surrounded by material possessions, but privileged because I had what every child, would ultimately crave if they had the opportunity to do that, and that is a loving and supportive environment. So I grew up always knowing I was adopted, perfectly at peace with that. My mum and dad were, as I've said, very devoted parents. Mum and dad were both in business. My father started the Sunliner fiberglass caravan manufacturing a business up in Foster, being a little tiny town as it was then, back in the 1950s. And there were some 600 fiberglass caravans produced. There's somewhat of an Australian icon to this day, being the fully moulded and rounded fiberglass caravans you often see, or at least occasionally see on the road. I was very involved in my local community. I grew up, I suppose, as a typical Australian country kid, and that was a really wonderful way to start life. I came to Sydney to study law, and when I got a little way into my law degree, I started to think about the world around me. I've always had a social conscience. My father, Bert, was a card-carrying member of the National Party who resigned because the National Party was too left-wing for him. And he ended up with a son in the Australian Labor Party, broadly on the left of the Labor Party, and working for the Aboriginal Legal Service, whereas my father would never employ Aboriginal people in his businesses. And this was a source of great, unhappiness between us. And I guess it was one of the few discordant notes I had with my dad growing up. But I then, of course, served for some 6 years on the Sydney City Council and was elected to the House of Representatives in a by-election in 1984. I still had no interest in seeking out my birth parents because I was so totally content with my life as it had been and as an adopted person. And then in September of 1992, my son Jack came into the world. And I don't know whether you remember moments in your own lives when something you were so sure of in life turned out not to be quite as straightforward as you thought it was. And I always believed that in the nature-nurture argument, that nurture was still almost the sole determining force, or overwhelmingly the determining force. And I still believe it's hugely significant in shaping people's lives. But when I looked down on that little boy, my son Jack, in September of 1992, I realized that there was something more to life. I realized that this little boy I was looking down on was the only person in the world I directly knew was a biological, genetic relative of mine. And I just had this overwhelming feeling that this was a turning point in my life. And pretty soon afterwards, I lifted the contact veto that existed, preventing anyone in my birth family coming into my life. And that process of allowing an adopted person to seek out their birth parents, and why the family was set up under New South Wales legislation in the early 1990s with cross-party support. It's legislation that allowed a contact veto to be lodged. I had lodged such a veto, and in December of 1992, a bit over 2 months after my son was, or 2 months in fact after my son was born, I lifted that contact veto. And I received a phone call within a week to tell me that my birth mother was still alive and that she also had a contact veto, not to totally stop contact, but in order to control and limit the way in which contact occurred with her birth son, should I have ever made contact with her. I guess I was ready to, proceed quickly to meet my birth mother. you know, despite being a fairly socially aware person, I hope a sensitive and loving person. And indeed, it was those kinds of feelings that had caused me to lodge the contact veto, because I was so protective of my adopted mother and father. But when I lifted the contact veto, and the Department of Community Services appointed someone essentially to work with my mother and I, this is my birth mother Maida, and myself, to facilitate this reunion, I became aware of this crushing grief that had impacted my birth mother Maida her entire life, and indeed shaped and at least, you know, severely adversely impacted on her life, to the extent that she could never have any other children, because she had this, from my perspective initially, but later on to understand better, this seemingly irrational fear that the child would be taken away if she ever had any other children. And so gradually the Department of Community Services intermediary played this magnificent role in working with my mother, in giving her strength and comfort, in talking to me, to explaining my mother's position. We began to exchange letters, and all these letters, some of which are quite moving, are included in the book. The book isn't about politics, by the way. It's incidentally mentioned sometimes, but anybody who knows anything about me knows that I'm trying to find the best in people. I've never been a sectarian warrior in politics. I've always been tried to be an ideas person, you know, to, as corny as it may seem, to build a better world. And my book isn't about, you know, anything like any political memoir. It's very much about the personal. But as I was saying, when I had that opportunity to understand my birth mother's circumstances, gradually, step by step, we were ready to meet. And came that almost time when we would meet. And I had received from my mother the first photographs of her I'd ever seen. And when I wrote back to her in a letter, not knowing where she lived or anything about her, I set out details of my life in a letter with photographs. Here's me on a surfboard, and here's me at Foster High School, and here's me being sworn in as a member of the House of Representatives. And another photo was, here's me, a little boy, aged, I don't know, 5, 6, on the steps of my grandmother's house at 18 Lansdowne Street, Marylands. Remember that address? That's where I was taken when I came from the hospital. So I knew that address very well, and I just mentioned it in the back of the photograph I sent to my mother. And here comes the first devastating coincidence, that when my mother received this package of information in Sydney, and I'd sent it to her from where I was in holidays in Foster, my mother sees this photograph and she just has this almost heart-stopping moment, because she is living 10 houses away or 10 doors down from the place where I was photographed at my adopted grandma's house, you know, way back, you know, in the late 1950s or early 60s. And my mother had lived in that house in Lansdowne Street, Marylands, 10 doors down, since 1957. And I can remember people in the street. You know, I stopped going there when I was about 12, 11 or 12. And I remember Miss Ezzy, the Italian lady in the street, the 2 Dutch boys, Bernard, as I called him, and his brother. I remember the corner shop. You know, so it's almost inconceivable that my mother would have seen me. That's my birth mother, Maida. But fortunately, I say fortunately, because it would have been was such a grief-stricken moment had she remembered ever seeing me. But she certainly knew my grandmother, Mrs. Osborne, who lived at number 18. So this was an enormous thing for my mother to get over before we met. You know, the shock was incredible, but it even got more freaky, you know, more moving and more massively coincidental, because the second photograph I enclosed to my birth mother was a photograph of me sitting on a Santa Claus knee, where I'd been photographed probably as a 4-year-old, 3 or 4-year-old, and I think it was 1955, 56. And in that photograph that I sent my mother, I'm very clearly there with the year displayed as well. When my mother received that photograph in the same package of information, she suddenly thought to herself, oh, I've got a photo like that. And she went to her photograph album and she found a photograph with the same Santa Claus in the same year, with her twin sister's son, Darryl, sitting on the same Santa's lap. So you can imagine, you know, the extraordinary coincidences revealed by this package of information. Well, my mother and I met on the Opera House steps. We walked in the Botanic Gardens. And then, of course, contrary to the advice that I was to go slowly and say farewell to her after a brief time, I had no choice but to say, can I give you a lift home? I know where you live. And of course she accepted. I went home. I met what became my stepfather, Greg, and I had 20 wonderful years with my life and longer with Greg as I looked after him after my mother died in 2012. But I guess what I need to say is that this beautiful story, and it is a beautiful story, and the book ends powerfully with my mother's own words, because I found this letter that had been hidden, written by my mother Maida, when I was clearing out Greg's house where they'd lived for all those years. I found this secret cache of documents, including the letter from my mother. And it's a beautiful picture that my mother paints, both of the trials and the tribulations and challenges of the reunion, but ultimately this magnificent happiness that washed over her. But one message I always give people when I'm telling the story is to say that this is not a typical result for an adoption reunion. Most people don't have anything like this. You know, even if people are lucky enough to make contact with their birth mother, sadly for a very significant number of people, it doesn't work out. For others, they might find their birth mother, but they never meet their birth father. I went on to meet my birth father, who's still alive. I met him in 1995, and he was formed a huge part of my life. He's still alive. He's 92 now and lives on the Central Coast. I see him regularly. And I met 2 sisters and 2 brothers who also came into my life, which was a real shock for an only child. And indeed, there were some tremendous coincidences in that reunion with my birth father, which it's not possible to go into in the time that we have, but it's all in the book, you'll see. I would like to say something briefly about the social policies of adoption and the practices, because by any measure these days they were quite brutal. I talk about the history of adoption practice in Australia, which makes my book a little bit different from some books that talk about the adoption reunion but don't go into the wider policy issues. But essentially, the policies around adoption, you know, impacted certainly best estimates with all the wider family that are impacted by these, probably 250,000 Australians or more. When you look at all the, you know, the parents and the adopted people and the wider family. But the policies were overwhelmingly driven by the very prejudiced views that existed in those years concerning single parents. and indeed, writing in the Medical Journal of Australia, I quote a couple of doctors who were fairly typical, I'm sure, of doctors of their time, absolutely vilifying single mothers, calling them of low intelligence. And, the fact of the matter, of course, was that, a pregnancy outside marriage can happen to anybody. And of course, in the era that we're talking about, there was so much pressure for women to give up the child. The social stigma was great. The Canadian singer-songwriter Joni Mitchell, who also gave up a child for adoption in Canada in comparable circumstances, talked about the prejudice of having a child outside wedlock is so great, it was like you'd murdered someone. And it's very difficult for, people who were born, in the 80s or even perhaps earlier, to understand that level of stigma and prejudice that existed at that particular time. There's also this clean break, ethos that existed, that it was just in the best interest of the child that there be this complete break, with their birth family. And, these days, very different thinking overwhelmingly prevails. But the heyday of adoptions, of course, really finished in the 70s, although they continued on over that time. But that was the period where most of them happened. I guess I would also say to you something about the motivation for publishing the book. I haven't done it for money because I'm giving the proceeds to this justice reform initiative. Haven't done it for the ego, for sure. Certainly haven't done it, for reasons of that kind. But I thought, first of all, it was an absolute cracker of a story. I also thought it gave some insight into life as a parliamentarian, and particularly a minister in a busy portfolio, that your private life does go on, and that sometimes you have to, do the most extraordinary things in your ministerial life. I used to work something like 100 hours a week. It was absurd. But at the same time, this all played out for me as a family reunion, adoption reunion, at the very height of all that. I think one of the really interesting, funny things in the way that happened was that when I was originally writing to my father, I never liked to say to either my father or my mother what my, profession was or what my job was, because I thought to myself, used car salesman, bank robber, politician, who do people think less of? And probably it's the politician. But anyway, so I would write them a little cryptic note saying that, I have a high profile job and don't judge me by my job. And my father at one stage hid, when he was telling my brother Craig, who's a lawyer, telling him about me, when he was telling me about Craig, he basically hid the fact at that stage between us that Craig was a police officer, because my father thought that I was alluding to the fact that I'd been a bank robber or some well-known high-profile criminal. But telling this story, was a big act of love to allow me to do this on the part of my family. Although my mother had passed away, my father was still alive and my wider family. And I would never have published the story had it caused them harm. And they didn't know a lot of my mother's story, my birth mother's story, because I pledged to keep that private until ultimately she passed and I wrote this book. But they thought, as I do, that the story reflects really well on them. It's a story about love. It's a story about family and the bonds of family. And that's that mystery of life, that nature-nurture, those forces that shape us and the relative impacts of both of them. It also gives, as I said, some insight to the private life of a public figure. So with those words, I'll end my presentation. I think it's now time for any questions that people might have, and I'm happy to answer any question at all that people might have. Fatima?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Robert, for sharing that personal journey. Whilst we're gathering the questions, I've got one for you. What advice would you give people in similar situations to yourself, and perhaps families where they find family members are estranged and have been for many years? What advice would you give them?
You mean estranged, that people estranged adopted children and their parents, or
It might just be
within
estranged,
families?
not adopted, just
Yeah.
direct family members.
Well, that's a really fascinating question, and I suppose I would say, and this is without any cant or humbug or pretense, just being very authentic, I would say to you that, I'm very humble in entering this space because every family is different and circumstances are different. But in the first instance, talking about adoption reunion, the first advice I would give is that an adopted child needs to understand the grief of a relinquishing mother. And I hope fathers, of which I am one, will forgive me when I say that I really don't think that any father or any person can, unless you have been there, understand what it must be like as a mother to lose your child. And that is life-shaping, damaging to the core, and maybe life a permanent state. So I had to realize the depth of that damage. My mother was very scared at first that I would come into her life and leave. And, even now I find it very moving to talk about because it was so moving. My mother and I were very different people. And what's interesting is, how my birth parents and my adopted parents were almost kind of the opposites of each other, in the sense that my birth mother, Maida, was high energy, really dynamic kind of person in lots of ways. My birth father is gentle, soft. On my adopted family, my adopted father, Bert, was so driven as a human being, and my adopted mum was very gentle. That reflects all in the nature-nurture mix. But to go back to the point, in relation to my birth mother, I had to understand she was a very different person to me. She was, and I don't mind telling you, the joke's on me, but there she was living in Western Sydney in the electorate of my former dear colleague Tom Uren in the federal seat of Reid. A rock-solid Liberal voter was my mother, and been so all her life. She also listened to Sydney Talkback Radio, so we were very different. But that is the wellspring of my advice to people. Go approach this with both, with love in your heart, with lots of patience, and be prepared to be there for the long haul. That's what I would say. Within families more generally, I do have strong views about this. Ruptures in families do happen, but I just encourage people to go the extra mile, to try and find a way through, to build bridges, to repair those ruptures, because at the end of the day, it's highly likely that one of the people, that will be at your funeral is that sibling that you've been fighting with for the last 30 years, and or a parent that you're not at peace with. And I think we need to be at peace in the world. So I just encourage people to open up your heart and, do your best. It's not always possible, but do your best to try and heal it.
Thank you for that. Question here from Jessie Harmon. Has reconnecting with your birth family brought you peace? And how do your own children feel about your story?
Well, I must emphasize that I was always at peace. You know, I grew up, absolutely knowing I was adopted, never had an issue with it, never had it, other than a mum and dad I grew up with that just, gave me every life opportunity. As I hope, all of us can work to do our best to not only support our own kids, but, do more for kids who are doing it tough. That's why I'm involved in campaigns to do something better with our kids who get into trouble with the law than put them in those wretched juvenile justice detention centres. We can do better. Those kids need a whole lot more than detention. But I was always at peace, so that was lucky because I could give more of myself to my mother and to others. My own son Jack, and would be my stepdaughter Jade at that stage, who still is my daughter. Essentially, got to know my birth parents, and they were a part of their lives. And my father is, grandfather still, so, those relationships have been seamless and loving and beautiful.
Okay, thank you. I have a question here from Shirley Randall. She says she's very much enjoyed your talk, Robert. She remembers the days of the 50s very well, and where she lived was a Catholic hostel, and country girls would come there, have babies that would be adopted out. The other painful prejudice of those days, she says, was against abortions. And the other end of the street where she grew up was a private hospital where safe abortions were carried out. Now, Shirley says she's aware of a new amendment being presented to the New South Wales Parliament that also presents this prejudice against abortions. Do you have any comments on that?
Look, I don't think I do. I'm not aware of that latest development, what's going on there. I mean, I think what's interesting is, why did the adoptions stop? And a lot of people think it was social security reforms implemented by the Whitlam government. But I think the evidence is that it stopped before then, and there was changes in social attitudes and increased availability of abortion was clearly another reason why children, were not born and adopted. That's essentially what the evidence shows.
Okay, thank you. Well, there's no more questions, or we haven't time for any more questions, I should say. So I'd like to hand over to Alex Shaw now, who will give a vote of thanks. Alex.
Thank you, President Fatima, guests and fellows. Thank you, Robert, for a most interesting talk about your life, and particularly of your meeting your birth mother. I can well imagine the difficulties your birth mother must have gone through, and you're dead right. I grew up in the 50s, and the stigma was just dreadful. However, on the brighter side, the growing up in the 50s was probably the absolute dream time of anybody. I think I had a far better youth than my kids, and definitely my grandchildren. We had next to nothing. We had very few worldly possessions, but we did have freedom and innocence and a carefree way of life. I'd just like to give you a call, if I may, get the telephone number from somebody in Rotary. I work with an organisation up in the New England, which also spreads from Kempsey up to the coast, working with Indigenous kids, trying to, people, not kids, Indigenous adults who are seeking their birth certificate. It may seem strange in this world that we know today, but there are many hundreds, if not thousands, that still do not have a birth certificate. And this organisation has just been given a grant for another 3 years to fulfil those obligations. You know, as any of you would know, no birth certificate is just full of difficulties. No driver's license, no passport, no this, no that, and it's just terribly difficult. Robert, thank you once again, and you've had a very full and rich life I can see, and very rewarding life, and I congratulate you on that. I think you were absolutely blessed that you had brilliant and loving foster parents who gave you everything that your birth parents probably would have liked to have given you, but that was the circumstances. The Rotary Club of Sydney will make a donation in your name to Rotary International to continue on the eradication of polio. So thank you once again, Robert.
Thank you so much. It was a privilege, pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex, and thank you, Robert. I'd like to hand over now to Jeff Davey, who's going to speak on Rotary Next Steps, the mental health peer support. Over to you, Jeff.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I've been involved with mental health for the past few years, involved in facilitating peer support groups. And a peer support group is one where everybody in the group has got lived experience of mental health issues. And in my case, it's bipolar disorder. The thing about peer support groups is that makes them quite different, is that they're welcoming, they're accepting, they're safe, they're stigma-free, they're non-judgmental. They're places where somebody with mental health issues can be themselves. They don't have to put up a facade. The groups are normally fairly informal. There's no set agenda. There are a couple of topics that normally come up. They're a unique ingredient in the recipe for managing mental health issues. I've been running 2 groups here in the eastern suburbs, one in Bondi and one in Bronte, and they had to shut down because of the coronavirus restrictions. And we took the groups online, and then after a couple of weeks, and sometimes I can be slow to wake up, I saw this as being an opportunity, and in particular an opportunity to offer this sort of a service to Rotarians. And exclusively to Rotarians, to establish a group that was exclusively for Rotarians. Did that a couple of weeks ago. What happened, I spoke to Di North about the idea, and she said I should get our president to write to the other presidents, and so that's happening. And then I follow up with the individual presidents. We're having the meetings on Monday nights from 6 till 7, and we're slowly building up numbers. We had 3 people last night, and I expect to get up to sort of hopefully around 10. 10's about the limit. If we get more than that, we're going to have to start a second meeting. I have sent the information to Fatima. We use Eventbrite to, now for those who don't know, Eventbrite is an online booking service, and so people can go in and book there without having to go back via the club. One of the, because there's still a lot of stigma about, people do not like to acknowledge that they're experiencing mental health issues, and similarly they're unlikely to join an activity. So if there are 1,300 people in the district, somewhere between 130 and 260 could be expected to be experiencing mental health issues right now. Of course, the current circumstances have made things worse. They've made things worse for people with pre-existing conditions, and they have triggered problems for people who hadn't previously had problems. I heard last night that this was Lifeline in Victoria. The number of calls there has gone up by 90%. Sorry, not Lifeline, Beyond Blue, and Lifeline nationally has gone up by 22% over this period. So the pandemic is clearly having a serious mental health impact on the community. And anyway, I would simply like to invite any one of you who wants to join. Fatima, have you circulated that email?
Not yet. I was waiting for you to present, and then I will circulate it.
Circulate, fine.
Yes.
Okay. So the Eventbrite link is in the email. If people have questions, they can come back to me via that email, or you could pass on my phone number, Fatima, if you would like to do that.
Okay.
That's about all I wanted to say. I don't know whether anybody got any questions.
I have a question.
Sure.
What type of issues people bring into those conversations?
Well, if we go to pre-COVID, the most common mental health issues were anxiety and depression. About 2 million Australians experiencing anxiety, and I'm talking about the mood disorder anxiety, not about just feeling a bit anxious. 2 million with anxiety and 1 million with depression, and those are the common ones. Although we've had a couple of bipolars like me. Yeah, and people for whom this is their sort of first, I guess their first episode, so far it's all been anxiety and depression. It's simply triggered by the stress of the current circumstances.
Thank you. Thank you.
No other questions here?
You're muted, Glenn.
Sorry, I was on mute there. So thank you very much for that, Jeff. No further questions have come in. So I'll hand over for closing remarks to you, Fatima.
Thank you again, Jeff. I really appreciate you coming over here to speak with us about this program. So I'll share your information with the rest of the club, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, before I conclude with announcement for next meeting, for our upcoming events, are there any announcement, anything from anyone would like to let us know, let the club know? No? I can't see anyone? Okay. Well, let me remind you, this week we have a lunch meeting on Friday at the Castlereagh Hotel for those who are interested. It's an informal meeting and it's from 12 o'clock. So if you're interested, just turn up, or there is an invitation, a booking system, but you can also turn up. It's okay. And I'm going to be there. So it'll be great to see you. And as Tony will say to me, be good to see what you look like after 6 months or so before we haven't seen each other. You've probably changed so much. And the other event, of course, our regular meeting next week on Tuesday, the 25th, we have Craig Foster. Craig Foster is a former Socceroo player. He is an SBS sports commentator and also a professor on human rights. And he is very active in the space of human rights as well. So I invite you really to come and listen to him, speak to him. It will be a Q&A, and Charlie Allen, our Vice President, will be moderating this event. Yeah, I invite you to attend that meeting next week. It should be a very interesting figure. So yeah, any questions, anything from me? Please, we're going to stay online to have a chat for those who are interested for an informal chat. Otherwise, the formal part of the meeting has concluded. But thank you so much. Have a lovely afternoon and have a great rest of the week. Thanks for your participation today. Bye, everyone.
Okay, everybody should be able to unmute themselves now. If you have something to say, welcome to join.
Yes. Jeff, I want to ask you a question about there has been an increase, that's Jeff Davey. A lot of research recently, particularly with COVID and the isolation, there has been an increase in gambling, in addictive behaviors, and particularly gambling and alcoholism. Are these issues, do you see those? And I know your group is a peer support, it's not to deal with mental health issues, and I mean, not outside issues, but are you seeing any of those issues coming up in the conversations? You're muted, we have to, yeah.
No, they haven't come up in conversation, but I've heard exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's I guess is to be expected. Yeah. I mean, I did hear, I heard somebody talking the other day, it was a man talking, and he was saying that having a drink was the only pleasurable thing in his day.
Sad, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely from our work with the College of Physicians, and we have a specialty on addictive medicine, and has been a noticeable increase in addictive behaviors, particularly alcohol and gamblism and other forms, but these are the notable ones. Yeah. I have been talking to Rotary Health Australia, but I haven't had a response from them to actually run mental health first aid program as well for us, a workshop, if we can run it for those who are interested. But I'm still talking to them about that. I believe a number of organizations run those programs, but it's about raising awareness with oneself, but also about potential mental health issues with your loved ones around you, with your family and friends as well, to have that awareness.
Yeah.
Fatima, you need to talk to Cheryl DeGara at Australian Rotary Health. She's fully accredited to run those mental health first aids, and she does a very special deal for Rotarians. They're normally $300, $400 when you do them through your workplace, but she normally charges only about $35, which just covers the cost of the books and other printed matter. So
fantastic.
Have you got Cheryl's contact details?
Yeah, I have emailed her a while ago, but I haven't got a response from her, so I'll follow up with her.
I know she's very busy at the moment, but she's fully accredited, and they are amazing courses. I fully recommend them.
Thank you, Di. I will follow up with her, and we can offer it to our club and others who are interested. Yeah, that's a good idea. Thanks for that.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. How are you going, Di, with your, after being a district governor?
Oh, really good, thanks. Yeah, it's certainly a lot quieter now. It gives me the chance to sit in on lovely meetings like this. I mean, Robert Tickner's story was amazing, wasn't it?
Well, it's very moving. I've started reading his book as well. It's really moving.
I have to get his book.
Yes, I've got it on an electronic version of it. Ross, how is your work going with COVID as well? I'm sure you have impacted, your event services have been impacted by it.
Yes, it's been quite devastating in the business events industry. We organise conferences, congresses and exhibitions. We've moved to doing anything in the foreseeable future virtually, and that has a whole set of challenges. First of all, the cost, because we're also used to coming to Rotary and not paying anything now, whereas if we were normally going to Rotary, we'd be paying not only for our meal, but a portion of that goes to club administration or whatever else the board decides. So there's all those challenges of cost. There's for me and my business, we will go about 15 months probably with little next to no direct revenue. In that time, we will have we will have deposits and advance payments because of the events we're organising in 22 and 23. It's been a lot of work for us without revenue, because the industry. What's happened is, first of all, we postponed into 21, and now most of our 21 events are postponing into 22 or 23. So it's been painfully painful for my staff, and of course, in order to survive, we've had to prune our business back, and the staff have been, for those that we have had to stand staff down completely. because whilst JobKeeper is wonderful and we're so welcoming of it because it's such a huge help for us, on the other hand, it doesn't stop a lot of the entitlements from accruing, and to a business that wants to come out the other end of this and be able to grow again, if you're burdened with even more debt from having to carry people through this period, it makes it very hard. So, you know, I lived through post 88 when we had the bicentenary. 89 was, you know, the year of the Gulf War, the year of Ansett pilot strike, a whole recession for us. It was a recession for the country, but in my industry, in business events, it was quite significant. And so, you know, I know what it's like to go through 89 and the first half of 90 with no revenue. However, I didn't have the disease. You know, SARS we lived through. SARS was, you know, was short-lived really by comparison. We all got over it very quickly. And then the others, you know, unfortunately from, I think it was MERS, but I'm not quite sure which one it was now, around the time of the GFC, didn't even get noticed because the world was so focused on the financial, economic trends at the time. The actual contagious disease that was roaring through the world didn't even hardly got noticed because it just wasn't as newsworthy as the GFC. So, you know, I mean, it's tough times for my industry. Sorry, I've turned this into a speech.
No, it's
Very
very
interesting.
useful. It's good. Yeah, we need to hear that because there will be many members in our, you know, in Rotary who will be experiencing not the same, but similar consequences from COVID and the impact on their industry as well. So no, appreciate that. And I have been thinking about the impact on our members and what can we do actually. We can't alleviate that, we can't change it, but how can we support? What can we do to support? Emotionally support, mentally, you know, that type of support.
I think what Jeff's doing there, offering to hold those sessions is very helpful for those who need that kind of support. It's a very brave thing to put your hand up and ask for it, though. So that's one of the big challenges Jeff would be facing.
The stigma.
Yeah,
the stigma is still very high.
Can I just make an additional comment on that? I'm hoping that there will be enough people who become involved in this group to actually set up a specialty club, and then for which is in addition to other clubs, but then for this club to focus its efforts on mental health projects. And one of the projects I'd be suggesting would be to try and take peer support groups out into the community. There are only 20 odd in Sydney, and a lot more would be useful.
Yeah, what you need is not necessarily a club, but you can create an action group, or you can create a community core, which is essentially like a Rotary club, but you can include people from the public as well. And you'd have to have Rotarians in it as well. So, you know, if you need help with that, just let me know so I can direct you who to talk to.
I'm a relatively new member of Rotary. I've been about 18 months, and I still feel overwhelmed by the structure, all the bodies that are involved, all the things that are going on. Yeah, that'd be really helpful.
There's so much to learn,
believe
me. I keep discovering new things about Rotary, new people, and so on. Yes, there's so much. I don't. Glenn.
So sorry, Fatima. Jeff, no. I'm not sure if you're aware, but our previous past president, Reverend Keith Garner, who's also the CEO of Wesley Mission, during his year, his president's project was all around mental health.
Yes.
Right. And there were a number of events. It might be worth having a look at the connections with the Wesley Mission to see if something can be done there. Continue that work.
That's a good point. Yeah, very good point. Yes. Jessie, can you tell us some about your work in Rotary, your involvement? What do you do? I see you on Facebook a lot, and I connect with you, but if you can share with us some of your work.
Yeah, so I'm here in Ballarat with the Rotary Club of Wendouree Breakfast.
Yeah.
And will next year, so July 21, step onto the board of Rotary International, representing sort of Australia, New Zealand and the Pacific Islands. So it's nice to,
Fantastic.
it's nice to have that opportunity. It's lovely to join you today, and I'm here because I wanted to listen to Robert. I wanted to join you, but I also just did want to say thank you to the club for your leadership as we come into the centenary, of Rotary. You've been doing collectively a wonderful job to raise the profile of that milestone. I can see all districts and clubs getting on board. So, do say thank you and want to acknowledge, albeit that he's gone, Gary Brown, who's chairing that committee. So thank you very much. Jeff, there are definitely new Rotary clubs being set up that are cause-based. So if you are thinking about a Rotary club based around mental health, please don't discount that. It's absolutely an option. But it's great to listen to what you're doing, and lovely to be here. And I do wish you all the well. Fatima, you'll have a busy year, and as will you, Jeff.
Yes, it's going to be a busy year, but exciting as well. And it's the ambiguity makes it exciting and a little bit nerve-wracking as well, But we've got a good team on our club, and as well we work closely with other teams, like the Rotary Club of Melbourne. We work closely with them, so hopefully we'll have a really good centenary year ahead of us. Yes,
Jessie, we'll see you in Alice Springs virtually. Next month.
Yes, Tony.
Yeah.
You're a great LinkedIn man. It is you, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
You are
8,500.
Yeah, you are a wonderful champion for Rotary.
He is.
Always positive. Always on message. Just wonderful.
Thank
Tony
you.
works very hard and does his job extremely well, Jess. He's a real asset to Rotary.
We could do with Tony's in every district.
Absolutely.
I'm embarrassed.
I think
okay, moving on. Back to
No, it's great. I think, we talk about this using social media as very important medium for us, and we really, all of us should be using it more often if we can.
Yeah, I think it's great to see how Rotary International is really embracing it now, and it's just so effective. And it's not just a one-way process; it's a two-way communication process.
Definitely.
Anyway, September sounds very exciting. Got a great lineup there of speakers, and what a change! You're on board, and Gentleman's going to be the world president shortly. What a change!
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll say one more thing and then shut up, I promise. In the year that I will join the board, so next year, half of the board will be women.
Oh my goodness!
Wonderful.
That's really great to know. I received.
Should we be worried?
I don't present it as a hostile takeover, Tony. One senses that the tide has turned.
Yeah, at last.
I was reading Rotary Women in Rotary, that Facebook, and there was a former New York Rotary Club of New York past president. And she was talking about the first time she was invited to the club. It was, I think, to the New York club, 1988 or something, not long after that court decision that allowed women to enter. And when she went there, there was only men in that club. And so when she went, many Rotarians, men, left the room, would not talk to her, and left the club at that time as well. Yeah. And she said in her a statement that she had to initiate and talk to them, but a lot of them refused to talk to her. But then later she became the president during the 9/11. She got them through the 9/11. But how interesting, like it's not that long ago if you look at history. I know the younger people will think it's ancient, but for us, it's not long ago when women joined Rotary. You know that club we got a letter from, is it Blomley Club?
Bromley.
Bromley.
Yeah.
I looked on the website. We got a letter from Bromley that they were doing a toast for us today. It's in England. And I looked at their website. They don't have any women on their board now. And I looked back to 80 something, 85, and they've never had a woman president at all. All the same, they have the same, you know, white, older male figures on there. Yes. It's interesting how some clubs still very male dominated, that stereotype of male dominated.
Must be very old conservative areas.
Yes, I suppose. So I'm excited, Jessie, that we've got that on next year on Rotary International.
Yes, I mean, I'll be the first one to be pleased when gender is off the agenda.
Exactly.
But, you know,
when we don't have to talk about this.
We're not quite there yet.
No, we're not. Karen?
But, you know, you'd be surprised that in places like even Lebanon, where women really are second-class citizens in some ways, in the laws and so on, and yet in Rotary, I never heard about the women-men issue. It was always about just being a professional and joining a club. So never heard about it until a German Rotarian, who was a friend of my dad's, was totally shocked that I was a Rotarian and was telling my dad, we don't have women in our club. And I'm like, Joe, women are like strong women, you know? And I was very shocked. I said, Dad, I've never heard of it. And that's when I started finding out about the history. And I've been a Rotarian for over 20 years. So it was quite shocking for me. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you, Lena. Karen, you wanted to say something.
A few years ago, we became sister clubs with the Rotary Club of Makati in the Philippines, and they sent a group over. It might have been, it wasn't the year that we had the international conference, but it was around that time. They sent a group over of members and their wives, and they came to our club, and I sat with one and I said, so how many women members in your club? And he might have commented something about, oh, you have women members. And he said, none. He said they took a vote among the wives, and the wives didn't want women members because they were jealous. They were worried about their husbands. And I said to him, but if the wives become members, they can keep an eye on the husbands, you know, but he didn't kind of get that logic. That didn't go down well.
Oh, that's so true. I've been a Rotarian for 20 years, and the second club I belonged to was Queanbeyan West, a traditional males club. And in theory, I'm the second female to become a member, but the first member was a wife of a husband who was a Rotarian, and she only stayed in the club for a month before she went back to the inner wheel. But when I became a member, all the inner wheel members, who are actually the wives of the husbands, were asking me, what is my husband doing in the meeting? But yeah, how to get through as a female, very, very difficult. And I mean, even there now, their club is just over 50% women, but they're always talking about the women's membership. To me, that shouldn't happen at all. We're all equal members, regardless of your sex, your orientation, ability, disability, whatever. And until we've got it off the agenda, it just makes it difficult.
Exactly. When we don't talk about it, then we have achieved it. Yes. Yeah. Any diversity. When we don't need to talk about it, then it's not there anymore. Yes, I agree. Totally agree.
I just might mention that when I was in New Zealand quite a few years ago, I was president of my club in Parnell, and we had about 50-50 gender split. But the next, just over the water, there's a club called Takapuna, and they were all male. And some of the enterprising women from our club used to regularly visit that club, to the chagrin of the Takapuna people, because they couldn't refuse Rotarians visiting their club. But our women members used to go over there quite regularly, and I think they eventually converted them, but it took a while.
So you mean the other club didn't want women in their club?
No, all male club. Yeah.
Okay.
All male.
That was a good strategy. Yes.
Yeah, I think it worked.
I wonder, when did our club, the Sydney club, had women, admitted women to it? Does anyone know? to it?
Not sure. It'll be in our book.
80 something.
About 1990, 89, 90, thereabouts.
Yeah.
And our first woman member was the Chancellor of Sydney University, whose name is
Uni, yeah.
Leonie Kramer.
Leonie Kramer.
Yeah.
That's the one.
I'm about number, I'm probably 4 or 5 into.
Are you the first president, female president?
President Jocelyn Murphy, and then Patricia Harrison, and then myself 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and do we know, I'm trying to look at the history of women in Rotary in Australia. When was the first woman admitted in Australia to a Rotary club?
It would have been about the end of the 80s.
Okay. The same.
I know that my club, Rotary Club of Mill Point in WA, 88 was the first woman for them.
Okay, for them.
So that's probably one of the first, yeah.
Yeah. I'm looking at it from a centenary perspective because I wanted to have that documented and put it, you know how we have in, I don't know if you know yet, we're going to have a Pandora's box where a section on our website where we put stories about, we came up with the idea about 100 stories early on in our planning for the centenary to reflect 100 years. But now we're thinking about whatever stories we can get. We would like to capture stories. So one of the things I'm looking at is having the history of women in Australia in Australian Rotary. So one of the things is to start to look at when was the first woman admitted to a club in Australia. I don't know. And I don't know where to get that. I've been Googling it, but I couldn't find any information. Jessie, can you help?
I think, Fatima, it might be worthwhile talking to Grace Ramirez, who heads up the Rotary International South Pacific and Philippines office in Sydney. I would imagine they've got Rotary records of those early members. I think that's a fabulous thing to do for all of our benefit, just for posterity.
Yeah, just for posterity, just to put it as a history about women in Rotary in Australia, and when they first, you know, the first woman admitted, the first president of a Rotary club, those things, like the first district governor. And then we've got, are you the first zone head, Jessie?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
So you see, we've got a first here as well. So I like to have a story about the firsts and the experience. So yeah, that would be good. Thank you. I'll follow up with that. Thanks a lot.
Fatima, if you also contact the Rotary History Fellowship, they're also online. They've detailed most of that information in there, and they're keeping the details up to date as well. There is a bit of an argument occurring at the moment about women being women presidents in logging all of it and what has been declared as the first president or not, because some of the paperwork hadn't come in. So don't take it as legit what is dedicated on the website, because not all of it is necessarily true, and there's some detail to be added.
So they're called Rotary History Fellowship. Is that what they're called? Ronnie?
Yeah, the Rotary Rotary History Fellowship, and there's another initial after it, which I should know. Membership is also available at a very cheap amount. There should be in the district one person who looks after that fellowship. I do know the person in Canberra, but I'm not too sure about the Sydney person.
Thank you.
And you don't need to keep your membership, paid membership, I think it's $30 for 4 years, up to date, because mine isn't up to date, to be able to get information out of them.
Thank you. Paul, you're quiet.
Oh, yes, or rather be quiet than.
How was your work affected by COVID as well? Has it been?
I'm actually with my conveyancing work, growing strong in Sydney and New South Wales, but last year I was expanding the last year or two into Melbourne and Victoria. A lot of people don't realise it's quite expensive to renew your conveyancing licence when you do in each state. So by the time you do the Institute of Conveyances, do your PI insurance, you do your risk management model, both New South Wales and Victoria, it adds up to like $5,000 to $6,000 each state. So I renewed it for Victoria, but only got 1 or 2 matters at the moment, but I suppose once the corona crisis out of the way in Victoria, then I can rebuild the expansion into Victoria.
Good. Good luck. All the best.
Thanks.
Yes. And Glenn, you run your own business. How is it affected by COVID?
Well, certainly a tough one because I deal mainly with banks, financial services, investment managers, insurance companies, so that whole area. And over the first few months of COVID, the focus was on work from home. How are they going to support customers? Now we see a lot of senior people have been moved into customer roles or customer-facing roles where they're specifically driving programs of how to support small, medium businesses and individuals through the COVID era. And that's a big part of the focus. Of course, they're struggling with their costs. They're struggling even more with revenue. We saw Westpac announce that they're not going to be paying a dividend this quarter. So yeah, all of that means that they're just managing their expenses very tightly. So most of my business is overseas. I mentioned earlier that I'm doing some work with Credit Union Foundation Australia, people who attended a lunch meeting with when Dr. Peter Mason spoke. This would have been maybe months ago now, of Cooper. And I'm now working with them and a partner I have in Singapore, where we're helping to take 23 credit unions in Myanmar. We're computerizing them. We're not doing a digital transformation because today it's all paper-based, not even spreadsheets, paper-based. So we're taking them onto computers, and we're doing that at cost. We're just covering our costs. And then we'll roll that out in Cambodia and Timor-Leste and other countries as well around the region. And just going back to what Jeff was talking about, one of the things that we're seeing with addiction, one of the problems, or one of the challenges that we're trying to address is financial inclusion, of course. Poverty in many of the countries around Asia Pacific and the Pacific Islands are forcing very, very poor families into some horrendous acts. And pornography is one of those. And what we're seeing is, and we could call this a mental health issue, call it addiction, whatever name you want to put to it, but there has been a significant increase in recent months on online abuse of children. Wow. And we know Westpac have been in trouble about this because they haven't been properly monitoring money being transferred to suspicious entities. And it really is a big issue. And out of Australia, there's a lot of instances where this pandemic, the addiction to pornography has just gone out of control. It's a terrible thing. So what we're trying to do with GUFA is address the problem at source. If you can address poverty, lift the living standards, then there is no need for mothers with children to be able to feed the kids, whatever reasons they have for getting into this. Because it generally is, as we've seen in recent documentaries and our own research, it is very poor families where generally the father's gone and the mother's there with young children. It's the only way she can feed the children. It's desperate. It's desperate.
How sad. Desperation and despair.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Well, thank you for that update, Glenn.
So that's a very note, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's worthwhile as well to. I'll have a chat with you about what we can do with that. Yeah. No, it's good. Tony, your work is impacted as well.
To a limited degree, Fatima. I'm just finishing a research project at the moment for CBRE around the Asian region, and all the building owners in these countries, Korea, Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, the big unknown for them is they own all these huge office buildings, but what's going to happen in the next year or so? A lot of people going to be working from home. Will people still require a lot of office space? So that project's almost finished, and then I have a contract with a company which does research on behalf of the bank. So we're just about to start a new one on foreign exchange and a few other subjects there. But the business that Richard Poi and I run, the medical tourism business, where we send people to Malaysia and have their teeth done, that is dead. We can't leave the country. So you just have to pay local dentists very high price to have their teeth done.
Teeth done, yes, yeah. Wow. Well, did you have a lot of demand for that service?
No, it's very niche. So
Yeah.
it's mainly for people who've sort of need a major reconstruction. You don't go to Malaysia to have a filling done. I mean, you can.
No.
But you know, one person who's referred to as had a cycle accident in South Australia, and they quote about $80,000 to have a complete remodeling of their mouth, and they had it done for about $25,000 in Malaysia by top dentists. So it's very niche. But it was quite interesting building up relationships with hospitals and dental hospitals in Malaysia, and working with the government, which is interesting exercise. With the government's very unstable there at the moment, so not really missing it.
Thank you, Tony. No, it's who knows what the world. I mean, there are a lot of speculations after COVID what the world will be, and I think we'll continue speculating for a while because we don't know what COVID is yet, how will it evolve, and to know what will happen after. So yes, we're all wait to see.
Yeah. So I suppose from the mental health point of view, it's important that we've got to continue to be positive, and
absolutely.
Sometimes it's good just to get out and not get out, stay in and watch a movie. At least you 2 hours away from the virus. Completely different world for a while.
Yes, yeah, I do. I watch movies. I read, and I go out for walks whenever I can, or go to Cockatoo Island. We went to Cockatoo Island, part of our social distancing but safe trip as a club. For you, Jess, so you know, we did that last week, but we didn't have a lot of people coming, but at least we offer those opportunities every now and then.
Yeah, I can recommend it, even when the biennial is over. Just catch the ferry there. It's just so peaceful. You've got the whole view, uninterrupted view of the harbour, the bridge, the city, and just have a picnic there. Just enjoy it. We're just so lucky. I've been here for many years. I've never been to Cockatoo Island before, and it's interesting just to wander around. I'm going back soon.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. I like it. I've been there a few times, and every time I go, I thought, how beautiful it is. Such
another good place is Clark Island as well, but you need a private vessel to get there.
Yeah, I've been to Clark Island. Our company used to have a Christmas party there.
Where is it?
Oh, it's on the way to the Sydney Heads.
Okay. No, I haven't been to Clark Island, but
you have to go past the little jail, that inland jail that's on the sea. I can't think of its name.
Pinchgut.
Yeah, whatever it's called. But it's a wonderful place. But if you contact the YHA, the Aboriginal group in Surrey Hills have their own little tinny as such, and go there every Friday morning. So it is possible to do. But I'm glad to know that some people did go to Cockatoo on the weekend.
Yeah, we did. I think it was a lovely day, really beautiful, a lot of space, not many people around, so you could social distance with ease, no problem. The sun, the exhibition was worthwhile. So it was nice. I think we might plan next time to have a picnic or something. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't talked about it yet, but it has been on our agenda. We might
we've got to prize our members out of this hibernation thing that they've got.
Yes. Jeff, is your club doing face-to-face meetings or?
No. I mean, for two reasons. One is we're under stay-at-home orders.
Oh yes, of course. I forget
we're not as bad as Melbourne. We don't have the curfew, but we're under stay-at-home orders.
Yes.
The other issue is we meet, of all places, in an aged care facility.
Oh.
No, I can't see us going back for years.
No.
Get used to me, I say. I'm going to be dropping in on Rotary meetings everywhere.
Oh my God.
Oh yes, I know.
Oh.
So,
I mean, it's sad, but it's funny at the same time. You know what it is.
that is not good for the image, Jessie.
well, yeah, we sort of let that wash over us a bit, Tony. But there's just no getting away from it now.
No.
Oh,
I know we're trying to get a younger membership, but
Yeah,
the
well,
reason for that is because you've got a lot of members who are resident there.
Yeah, let alone the bad PR that might come from the Rotary Club of Wedderee breakfast single-handedly wiped out the whole age population in Ballarat.
Wow, you have to change your location once out of that. Yes,
I think we will.
But it's yeah. Well, we still, as you can see, still having our meetings via Zoom, but we try to have events to entice people out in a safe environment. Well, we can, we went to a museum a few weeks ago. Last week we went to Cockatoo Island. We have lunches at the hotel where we usually meet, but not many people are coming out. 6, 5, that number. Yes.
And I think we'll just have to accept that people will come back to this at their own rate.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think you're right, Jessie.
We are doing that. We're making the opportunity available for people if they want to, but we know that they have to feel comfortable to go out and do it. Unless they're comfortable, they can't. So we'll just wait and see. Now, I do have to go back to my work.
Yeah.
So it has been
I have to go also.
Yeah, lovely.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
There's no food delivered for these meetings, is there?
No, we could do that. We could do
get Uber Eats to bring it around.
Uber Eats.
Tony, I'm sure you could organise a chef. My chef's name is Ironic. Just think about it. So Anthony B, somehow you try and make a word for it. But yeah, Ironic needs a bit of supervision. But yeah, somewhat okay.
We're all going to think about that.
Look at his face going, you want me to cook?
And maybe the next outing we can take Jessie with us on virtually. Like we go if we're going on something virtually, Jessie come with us.
With us. Well, thank you so much, Jessie, for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
No, thanks
thank
for
you,
having
everyone.
In September.
Yeah,
Okay.
see you.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye.
Great
Bye.
suggestion.
Bye.
Someone should do a Facebook Live when we are out or something, but I better let you all go. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, everyone. Bye.